Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the Icewind Dale supplement, Coldblood, designed by Alice Loverdrive for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. So Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostbane, when it was released, was often described as a horror campaign or a survival horror adventure. That's not necessarily the case, and I'm not going to spoil any of Rime of the Frostbane, so don't worry about hitting that pause button or anything, but the degree to which it goes into survival horror elements are going to be left up largely to the DMs and how much they actually want to explore that territory. But as written, it's not necessarily designed as a hardcore horror-themed adventure. And the nice thing about 5e is you can modify that campaign to go more in that direction if you want to, but you'll still need to make some adjustments, most notably because D&D is still a long rest-based game, which means it has that very weird disconnect about, you can fall off a cliff and, well, first of all, falling damage is a whole other weird thing. You can fall off a cliff and break your leg, and then we just settle down for a nice 8-hour rest, and we're fresh as daisies in the morning. So those are kind of the things that you have to make adjustments for if you actually want to create a horror adventure. And not horror like Curse of Strahd, not like gothic horror with vampires and stuff, but survival horror, to where the actual environment is very bleak and unforgiving and dangerous, and just being in this area is sapping your strength and willpower. And that's partly what Coldblood at least attempts to do. It's very short. It's not comprehensive whatsoever. I wish there was a lot more information here, because I think I would love to read and learn more about how to run a survival horror campaign. Even if I'm not necessarily going to use all of those rules or tactics, some of that could be useful. It does streamline the kind of rations and gear, all those like using a crowbar and rope and stuff pretty effectively, which I like. And it even mentions like I don't want to even keep track of that stuff. And I agree completely. Now, the supplement is written in an extremely casual way. And I hesitate to complain about this because obviously I do my reviews in an extremely casual way. I do all these in a single take. There's a lot of ums and buts and me stumbling over words, because what you see is what you get. I'm not putting on a front or anything. I'm just chatting with you about products on the DM's Guild. So I hate to complain when something is written in a similar style to where it's like a blog post or something you would put on Reddit or something. Which isn't to say it's poorly written. It's very well written, but it's just, for example, the very first sentence is, "Oh, cool, yet another bullshit homebrew with tons of stuff to track, right?" And then it goes on, "Wrong. No one's to track a shitload of things, me included. That's exactly why I'm writing this." So, wait, so you suggest money just magically transforms into food or torches or whatever? That's unrealistic. Go fucking play GURPS. Steve Jackson would probably be happy to see someone buy something that is not Munchkin. Do the old man a favor. That's funny, and that's how people talk. That's not necessarily how I want to see a ostensibly professionally designed product that's put up on a website to purchase, that the kind of style that I want to see used. And I'm not trying to censor somebody or say the only style allowed is one that's very, stuffy. I appreciate it. I very appreciate it when products are written with jokes in them, with a lot of, witticisms, and just make it an enjoyable read for the DM, even if, players are never going to read it. I really love that. But it almost takes me out of doing this if I'm reading something that just feels like a blog post or something you would put on a forum reply. It's just too, there's just too much of a casual language. And I'm guilty of that too. When I'm writing, on my blog or something, I'll use that kind of language. And then oftentimes I'll go back and actually clean up and delete a lot of those sentences, because I'm like, oh, this is just me, stream of consciousness, thinking about what I'm saying and typing in. It just doesn't necessarily translate well to actual, like, putting things in a written context. So Ultimately, I did not put that on my con because it felt like me policing someone's tone too much, which is not something I want to do. But it did take me out of the whole thing in a way that I did not like, even though I'm fully aware, and I'm worried I sound like a hypocrite too, because I'm fully aware this is how I run my reviews, is very much, I curse all the time. It's just, again, that's how I talk. Like, this is how I do reviews. So, but it is there. So it's something to touch on, I suppose, for this product. All right. So the actual stuff that it gives you, first things it does is, as I mentioned, it streamlines having to deal with like rations and tents and climbing gear and clothes, bedrolls, food and water. All of that stuff is just an adventurer's pack. That's it. You don't have to keep track of any of this stuff. Instead, you can buy uses of the adventurer's pack for 20 gold apiece. And something D&D does not do very well is have a money sink, because very, very quickly players, unless you're very carefully hamstringing them as a DM, will amass so much money that they basically don't have to be adventurers anymore. They could just retire and do whatever, which is always weird to me. But in this case, this provides, I think, a fairly useful money sink, because anytime you expend any of that, whether it's food so you can long rest, or a rope, or a lantern or something, it expends a use of that adventurer's pack. And according to these rules, you can only carry a number of adventurer's packs equal to twice your strength modifier. Now, the interesting thing about D&D 5e also is that strength is actually not the end all, because there, a lot of even melee martial fighters can use dexterity as their main. I mean, monks especially, but you could use, and rogues obviously are dex based, and a lot of fighters could be dex based. So you could have not a whole lot of strength in your party. And, even like the wizard who's got 8 strength or 10 strength can't carry any adventurer's pack. So how do they carry their food? Well, maybe they have to have their fighter or barbarian buddy carry their stuff. So it limits the amount of rations you can take if you want to deduct those. And that way you're not keeping track of a whole bunch of different supplies. It's just one single supply. I like that rule a lot. I've even gone so far as to eliminate all of that and never worried about that, because I figure, last time I had to do it was in Tomb of Annihilation, and I figure we could just scavenge things every time while you're in the jungle. Now, what I did change in Tomb of Annihilation, for those of you that watched our campaign, is, because it's a hex crawl for the good first 2/3 of it, is I eliminated automatic long resting. And instead, everybody could short rest, but the jungle was like one big dungeon crawl, and only in certain areas, or when you reach certain destinations, basically, and you cleared them out, could you then take a long rest. And it felt decently balanced. There was a few times where I'd be like, okay, you find a cave that seems, pretty safe to rest in, or I think one time I literally put a lizard folk rancher that they were invited to dinner with, and could just have a nice sleep there. So there are things that you have to introduce to kind of balance that, but otherwise, the no long rest thing I think was very important, because how do you do random encounters in D&D 5e and not just have, resting every night, everybody's full up? It's the same problem of the rest system, is kind of destroys the random encounter system. So this attempts to say, okay, you have to expend an adventurer's pack use to rest, but you also can't long rest out in the wilderness, which I agree with, unless, and it says specifically, you can relieve stress, which in this case could mean different things to different people. You could, and there are suggestions here, participate in a mass, spend time with family, gamble your money away, drink yourselves into a stupor, or something else that's hard to do when you're in the middle of nowhere, which is basically the mechanical way of saying you don't get to automatically gain the benefits of a long rest if you are traveling somewhere. So I agree with that to an extent. Now, how do you solve the problem of spells like Leomund's Tiny Hut? Well, that actually solves that concept. If it's just because with my rule, it was a question of, well, you're just uncomfortable. Well, Leomund's Tiny Hut solves that, in which case I kind of backed off of my entire long rest restriction rules, and by then we were level 5 and cared less about it anyway. But in this case, that wouldn't even solve your long rest problem. You still wouldn't necessarily be able to, again, gamble or drink or, pray to your god. Well, I guess you can technically do that anyway. But anyway, it gets a little, you're trying to basically solve the problem of how do I stop players from resting all the time, because that adds to the survival horror aspect. If your supplies are dwindling, you're out in the wilderness or something. However, so I'm kind of on board with that for the most part, and I think that's a sound reasoning, and I do think that's a problem that needs to be addressed in D&D 5e. Now, the solution that this product comes up with is that you have, when you do partake in an activity, it says, that brings peace to your soul, so you do one of those things, you do not automatically get to long rest. Instead, that just gives you the chance to roll a wisdom save, which I'm not sure why it's a save and not a check, and only if you roll an 18 or above do you actually gain the benefits of a long rest without any kind of negative effects. If you roll 11 to 17, you get your long rest, but you also do a number of other things, which all of them create a DM headache. One of them just says you attract trouble. What the hell does that mean? It could mean all kinds of things. One of them is your character vanishes for a few weeks, and you have to play a different character. That's obviously a huge monkey wrench in any kind of story-driven campaign. Or your current purveyor cuts you off, find a new source for your vice. That could either matter a lot or not at all, depending on, I mean, does clerics still get to worship their god just because they missed this check? And plus, why is, and by the way, if you roll a 10 or less, no benefits from the long rest, even though you did your thing. You did the long rest, you know, you, what does it say? You brought peace to your soul. So that doesn't work because A, I don't think it's balanced very well at all. 18 or above just to gain the benefits with no negatives. B, it creates a lot of headaches for the DM because it adds all these other effects. And C, why is it wisdom for all of these things? And that way penalizes non-wisdom based characters. Like, okay, praying to your god, that could probably be wisdom. Drinking yourself into a stupor, constitution, low. Spending time with your family, probably charisma. Gambling your money away, dexterity, or maybe intelligence. You know, you could at least play around with the actual ability, and it probably should be a skill check maybe, and not a saving throw. So I get the idea here, and plus I'm not sure why, if you gain the benefit, first of all, I would use maybe this rule modified a bit, rebalanced, if you're out in the wilderness and you want a long rest and you can't achieve your peace to your soul or whatever, you can't do that thing, then maybe you're looking at doing this. And the other problem it creates, for a fourth problem, then you end up with some characters who can long rest and others who can't because of the way they rolled. And what if you're poor, and you know, some classes care a lot more about long resting than others. Your warlock and your fighter and your monk might not care as much, but your wizard and sorcerer sure as hell do. Your druid and cleric, like, they need those long rests, even more so than the other folks. And if they miss this, you know, one check, then they could be really screwed. So I think I would modify that to make it so, okay, this is if you're trying to cheat the system, you're out in the wilderness, you've created a safe space, you're in a cave, or you've got Leomund's tiny hut or something, you can't necessarily, you're not in the town or whatever, so you can't do all the things you want to do for a long rest, but maybe you're trying to make those things happen, then I might engage in like a skill challenge or something so that all the party members, and they can maybe choose what they do to try to unwind, so they get a chance to roll whatever skills they're best at, and then take the party as a whole and say, okay, did you as a group manage to, you know, alleviate your stress and do all that, and then gain the benefit of a long rest, or maybe not, in which case, I'm sorry, you still spent a really rough night together trying your best. So I agree that there needs to be a solution to be found here. I have yet to ever find a satisfying solution to the long rest random travel problem, and I think that is one that needs to be addressed, especially to create a proper survival horror atmosphere. Is you need to have it so there's no automatic long rests, and you know, you're deducting resources and stuff, and there's some extra parameters involved. But I don't like the end solution here. It doesn't feel very well balanced and satisfying. I do kind of like the short rest. The add a little bit here about if you take a short rest, then one of the characters can actually just tell a story, you know, kind of a classic like campfire tale, and that allows others to regain hit points. It's essentially the Song of Rest from a bard, so I would not introduce this rule if you have a bard, but it's a cool idea also to flavor your bards that way. For your bard Song of Rest, they're actually like telling campfire tales. I think that's a cool idea. But otherwise, in fact, this is even stronger than a low-level Song of Rest because it's 1d6 plus your charisma modifier. So interesting little rule there, but again, that's basically what the Song of Rest is. Take Watch is, I mean, I think there's already rules for like perception versus, I don't know why it's not using stealth here. This just says if you roll a, you know, basically what you need to roll to watch any creature or something that approaches your camp, but I don't know why you just wouldn't take the stealth roll of an enemy creature and apply that to the perception or passive perception of a character who is on watch. Maybe you can expand on rules there, but that part doesn't really interest me too much, and I swear there's rules like this already in the rule books. If not, then maybe we just used our own house rules for so long that I've forgotten. So the other big thing that covers here is a new system for death. This was a little confusing. I think what the designer is getting at is that if you die in the north, you do not automatically die necessarily. This is almost like a D8 table or something, but it's just kind of you can pick and choose. I'm not sure if the DMs choose or the player chooses, but essentially your character can be changed. But there's a weird balance between a pretty good change and a really bad change and a really, really bad change. Obviously, one of them is you just drop to 0 and you die, or you could become a monstrous undead NPC, or maybe you just gain resistance to cold damage, or you gain +1 AC, or you have to always roll with disadvantage. So there's a huge variety of change here, depending on, and it's not a table, it's just you get to pick one. So there's a little bit of confusion there on what was the point of it. Is this trying to make things a little bit more scary, but you're giving people an out on death? Or I do think there's an interesting concept if you want to try to, obviously take a thing from zombies. You want to make it so if a character dies out in the wilderness, then they can come back as an NPC undead. Now you have to go through certain parameters, like your party members can't bring the body back, or maybe they try to bring the body back to town, but the character wakes up as an undead or something. That could be really interesting. Obviously, you have to okay that shit with your players, I think, first. But I'm not. I don't know. It didn't quite work for me here. I don't think I put this as a complaint. Double check real quick. No. I did originally, but then I was like, well, I mean, it's not bad, but it's just not something I would necessarily use, and I don't like the way that it's just goes from the gamut from a pretty good advantage to dying, which is odd, to just regular death, to a really, really bad, like, permanent disadvantage. I don't know. We use lingering injury rules in my campaigns, which is if you go down to 0 hit points, you gain one of those. And I think you could expand that to where if you're obviously out in the wilderness, then it's really hard to get that fixed. You have to go back to the 10 Towns region. Speaking of 10 Towns and the whole Icewind Dale thing, I think this supplement does miss out on expanding a lot of the ideas and features and rules in Rime of the Frostmaiden. One thing I would like to say, and this is not even necessarily for just this one, but a lot of products, I would love if a lot of products specifically looked at one campaign adventure from, an official 5e book and expanded on it, either provided new, adventures or new rules or things like that. And that's a lot of stuff that I've reviewed, and I've enjoyed that because, as I'm going to presume, a lot of people are searching for supplemental adventures while running these campaigns. And I don't think this one does enough with the Rime of the Frostmaiden adventure in terms of it doesn't cover, like, travel distance and how to change or alter that to make it more survival horror, or what happens if your players get mounts, they get dog sleds or axe beaks or something, and how does that affect what they can carry on their rations, and are there rules for, the Empire Strikes Back, like killing your Tauntaun and crawling inside for warmth? Are there specific, warmth rules about, different colds and how that can affect the players? And maybe give me some new random encounters that are specifically more about survival horror. And now that we're keeping track of adventurers packs, now you could do encounters that are like not enemy related at all, but maybe you stumbled through the ice and you have to roll a dex save to not drop some of your rations. And if you fail, then you lost some of your adventurers pack supplies. Things like that. I would have loved to see just basically a lot more content from here, but specifically content drawn from Rime of the Frostmaiden and how to specifically make that campaign more survival horror. Instead, we get some new NPC stat blocks, the Coldblood, which I think this alludes to the player death section from before, where you can just become an undead NPC. What I do really like from these are that the enemies are given multiple tables for what they can carry in terms of their weapons. That's really cool. That's a video game ass thing, and I love it. I'm here for that because that's such an easy way to instantly make the same stat block a little more interesting and a little bit more variety. It can be a bit of a headache for a DM, technically. You'll have to mark the tokens or something, or remember which ones have which weapons and armor. But that could be interesting because you could literally, tell people oh, here's this skeleton, this one's got more, it looks like it was a knight, and it's got more, armor covering it, whereas this other one has just got, tattered, rotting hide on it, and it's got, and mechanically it actually has a different AC than the one wearing the better armor. I think that's really cool and something I've honestly haven't seen that much from D&D stat blocks, and it's something I would like to see a lot more of. And maybe some of the skeletons have shields, some of them are wielding, two-handed swords, and some of them have, bows or something. And it goes even further with this when it gets to the Draugr Deathlord, which it's been a while since I played Skyrim, but I think the Draugr are a nod to Skyrim's like Viking undead people, which are pretty strong in terms of having, if you wanted an undead enemy in your Realm of the Frostbane campaign, the Draugr would make a more powerful enemy for sure. And the Draugr Deathlord at CR7 with almost 200 hit points, 3 attacks, including an attack that can stun enemies, a Frost Breath, a Cleave attack, a reaction that it gets a free attack, and it can have all kinds of special weapons and enchantments that do different things. Holy shnikes, this thing is a straight up boss monster, and it is nuts. But it's a cool idea to basically be able to equip your. It feels like a very hack and slash video game thing to do, is you equip your enemies with different weapons that have different abilities and even different enchantments. It's the classic Diablo, it's the boss of the blah 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 of the blah 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 with this ability. That's a cool idea, and one that, frankly, again, I would like to see more supplements use that quality of adding those little tables or modifications to enemies. I think that's really, really fun. And the final thing that wraps up this pretty short supplement is its own appendix, which is almost kind of laughable given how short it is in general, but it just goes over everything we just went over in a little more organizational way. But it includes this final page that actually has some good information on it that I almost missed, because who was reading that back page? It usually just has, end little coming soon or something. But in this case, it has straight up great stuff on it, including the player principles, which is something that, again, I wanted a lot more information on, because this is advice on running a survival horror campaign, such as how bleak it is, how to insert humor and levity without making it very jokey. In fact, in this case, it says there's no faster way to ruin the atmosphere of horror and darkness than turning it into a slapstick comedy, which, by the way, without spoiling Realm of the Frostmaiden, there are some parts of that campaign that I'm like, this feels like a Disney movie more than a horror campaign. It's all over the place tonally. So reinforce the dark tone and leave your horny tiefling bard Chad Thundercock at home. Pour one out for Chad Thundercock. That's a great name. I like that section a lot. I wish it were a lot longer, because I think I generally like a lot of what the designer is coming from here, which is, how to take Realm of the Frostmaiden and make it more of a survival horror campaign. But I wanted more. I wanted more of like every single section, and maybe a little bit of a fine tuning when it came to the long rest rules and the actual death rules that could affect players. I think maybe borrowing from the lingering injuries system from the Dungeon Master's Guide would make it more effective than having this weird, like, some of these are positives and some of them are negative consequences from death in the north. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Coldblood. Pros, I like how it streamlines gear, supplies, and rations into just Adventurers Pack uses. That's very smart and a good way of doing it, and allows you to keep track of a single resource for all of those different things. Pros, new frost-themed undead creatures, feature tables for weapons, armor, and enchantments. Given how the designer did that, I would have loved to see more NPC stat blocks then, because I think that's a neat idea of inserting, giving them like swappable, weapons and things. And pro, the player principles section at the end provides DM advice for running survival horror campaigns. That should have been at the beginning and should have been a full page rather than at several bullet points, because that was very critical information that I would have loved to see more of. Cons, the long rest restrictions are good, and I have employed, similar restrictions before, and I think they're important and necessary, especially in the survival horror campaign. But the rules here are poorly balanced and create more problems for the DM, by which I mean it says you attract trouble, your character vanishes for a few weeks. No. That's not what I want at all. It's way too restrictive. Even when you're getting your long rest, you're having to roll this, and it's only a wisdom. So I mean, I already went over it, but it's not the right solution. I think the designer correctly identified the problem, did not come up with a satisfying solution. The other con is basically that I just wanted more. It misses expanding rules on mounts and travel times and encounters and things from specifically Realm of the Frostmaiden that I would have loved to taken and disseminated and decided, how do we take what's here already and tune it to where it's more bleak, it's more horror, it's more about survival and all of that. And I don't feel like this does very much of that. Final verdict: while far from comprehensive, Coldblood streamlines and expands upon the survival horror potential of Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can find our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.